Welcome everyone. Welcome to Bhoomi Webinars number 10. You can find the previous webinars on our YouTube channel. So this webinar, we've kind of said how to have a meaningful career. It's a little misleading as if we have tips and tips of the trades to give you to have how to have one, but it's really more about how do you um, sort of chart a path where uh, there is sort of a congruence between your thought, feeling, actions in really different aspects of your life, and work being one of them. So I think just to make it clear that this is not really going to be a workshop where you'll get um, many tips on how to find a proper job or a career. I think this is a much more, maybe a deeper and a philosophical look at what really work needs to be like, how enriching does it need to be, given that uh, most of us spend a fair bit of time working. And I think maybe probably one third, if you're a diligent and industrious worker, you probably spend one third or more than one third of your adult life working. So I think for us to just get a sense of if we're doing something for that amount of time, maybe we really need to be conscious of um, what's the larger goal behind it. So that's the basic sort of brief for this webinar. It's the actual flow is really emergent. We really want this to be a participant driven session, because really if most of you have joined this webinar, I'm assuming, and I think even the panelists would agree, that uh, you have some questions on your mind, or you have a certain intent with which you've come here. So I think before I even go and introduce the panelists, I would like to hear from some of the participants. You can just unmute yourself and quickly share, or you can even use the chat box to just probably talk about your intention in joining this session. Like what information would you like to know? What is it that you really uh, have come into this session with? Like, so maybe if anyone would like to share, they can use the chat, or you can just unmute yourself. We're going to give a couple of minutes for that, just to hear from um, the participants as to what brings them here. It would be really nice to know that. So yeah, please go ahead whenever someone would like to share.
And Adil, I can take we can take notes while they speak, right? Just as ways for us to also construct our narrative.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we have many participants. Some of them I know have been really doing a lot of good work. So I'm just waiting for someone to take the lead and just share as to what their intent is in joining this session, so that the panelists and I can even maybe design the actual 1.5 hour that we have, the 2 hours that we have, based on some of the inputs that we get. So this is the time, guys. The floor is open. All right, looks like we have no questions as of now. That would have really been great to get some sort of uh, a sense of the intent. But I think then we'll go ahead and really start with the introductions and get into the core of the matter. So I think I would first like to introduce Vivek. Vivek, thank you for joining us. Vivek has been an entrepreneur for uh, many decades now. Would that be, would that be, well, well, given that you started at the age of 16 with a project, I'm going to
I
take the
mean,
liberty.
okay. Yeah, please don't say decades. Yeah.
Right.
You can say 10 plus years or something, yes.
10 plus years
Yeah,
of
that's
working as an entrepreneur, creating solutions related to sustainability, both at, I think, um, micro level individuals, but also working with corporations, big initiatives to see that how can they really bring down their carbon footprint. That's been, I think maybe that was the intent with which Sea Balance and maybe No to CO2 started as well. But we'll get into the, Vivek will probably talk about a little more of his journey in detail. Vivek is also an Ashoka fellow and someone I think who's really interested in figuring out how um, changes can be also made in the workplace that you're working in. So it's not just about looking at the larger system, looking at the world, but also looking at how can we sort of implement values that we talk about in our own organizations, in our own lives at an individual level as well. So I think would be really interesting to hear from Vivek on that aspect of how he's trying to implement that at Sea Balance and in his own life personally as well. So welcome, Vivek.
Thanks, Adil.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, we have Manvinder Singh Inania with us. Manvinder, can you show us your face? I know you're somewhere there.
Hi.
Hi, Manvinder. So Manvinder is quite an oddball. So he's a college dropout, engineer who's a dropout, and then he started his journey at Bhoomi College. He did the fellowship in sustainability in 2012, 2013. After that, his,
First part.
yeah, the first batch. So, and he's had a colorful 8 years since then, working in many organizations, working with ASHA that works with sustainable agriculture, working with Greenpeace,
Greenpeace.
working with ALAP that works for afforestation in the hills. And now I think he started something of his own, I think, which is very interesting, sounds interesting. It's called Kida. It's maybe Manvinder, you'd like to do a very, very quick intro to Kida?
Yeah, so Kira is a space where a lot of people working in the alternative sector who wishes to collaborate together on projects and be more inclusive of people outside the sector to become a part of the sector. They can all work together under the same umbrella.
Right. So yeah, I think we'll get into detail of Kida and your basic journey of the past 8 years. It's been unconventional, and I think a lot of the participants would like to know of how a youngster uh, takes the kind of leap of faith and sticks on with it. So thank you, Man, for joining us.
Manvendra, I like your approach. Sorry for interjecting, but instead of being a bookworm, you're a real worm. You know, you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I have a lot
We
of
also
them.
have another Bhoomi College alumni with us, Paras Tyagi. You're there? Maybe a quick hi. Uh, yeah, I think maybe Paras is on mute. So Paras did the fellowship in 2012, 2013 at Bhoomi College in sustainable living. And since then, he's also had a very, very interesting journey. He's interned and worked with many organizations, including Celco that works with sustainable energy solutions. He's worked with Sahas that works with waste and waste management. Um, he's done his master's from IIHS, if I'm not wrong. Paras, you can correct me if I've got some of the details wrong.
It's a National
And
Law
now,
School, Bangalore. Masters in Public Policy.
Masters in Public Policy from National Law School. And I think maybe you would want to quickly talk about the organization, the initiative that you've started Center for Youth, Culture, Law and Environment. Maybe a quick background of the work that it does.
It's a not-for-profit based out in Delhi, and I work with the rural and urban villages in Delhi where the kind of farmers who are lured into converting their farmlands into housing sites or other different kind of land uses. I'm trying to work with them to ensure that whatever decisions they take, they ensure that uh, they are wisely taken decision, whether it's somewhere related to agriculture or new age technology being introduced in their farms, or even commercial or industrial land uses brought to their villages because of the proximity to the city. And that is a work which has successfully helped me to ensure that farmers who were not able to sell their product directly into the city during the lockdown, they could directly take their produce from the farm to the families in the city. So it was a
Right.
farm to family kind of initiatives we are doing right now. I'm very happy about that.
Thank you, Parus, for that. Sounds very interesting. We'll get into probably a little more detail in just a while. So thank you for joining us. And we also have Abhishek Thakur with us. He's co-founder of Blue Ribbon Movement. He's a Bhoomi Senior Fellow and a Bhoomi friend as well, who's worked for the past 15 plus years. 15 plus is a good number, I think, in really finding solutions, urban solutions for leadership, civic engagement, and really just working with youth to create a movement um, where we are much more involved in um, our communities. So I think Abhishek, welcome to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. We also have Sita Anantasivan with us. She's founder of Bhoomi Network, Bhoomi College, Prakriya Green Wisdom School, and somebody who's just spent close to now 40 years working with people, working with individuals, organizations on how to kind of do self-level work, do have better processes in organizations, and really how people can discover what they really want to do. So I think in the context of today's webinar, somebody who can get us rich insights into how do we go about even finding who we are before we can figure out what is the work that we want to do. So in that sense, somebody who can give us really rich insights. So Sita, thank you for joining us. Right. So I think Sita is just having a couple of tech issues, but she's here. So I think I would like to start with Abhishek, and just this idea of, I think you work with something called life space design. Maybe would you like to talk about um, that, and how do you integrate the idea of maybe ikigai or seeing work as an integral part of what you do in that program, and in general the work that you do?
Sure, I could begin, Adil. Thanks for having me here. Um, yeah, I think just starting with the idea of life space design, the broad idea is design. When you talk about design, you talk about who's the user for a certain design and how can the design really fulfill the intent of a particular user. So when we look at life space design, we talk about really what's the intent a person has in terms of the kind of life they want to live and what kind of a design will allow them to live that kind of a life. And when we say design, we talk about various areas of your life and how do they all fit into a central theme, a central thread. Right? So when we talk about finding meaningful work, it is not divorced from several other questions. It's not divorced from the question of what kind of a lifestyle you would like to live. It's not divorced from what's your larger vision for the world and what kind of a world would you like to see. It's not divorced from the kind of spouse you would have because your spouse has to kind of be compatible to your profession. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for a lot of trouble. So various areas of your life and how do they plug in together is really life space design. And in that context, when you look at any work to be truly meaningful for you, it really has to bring you alive. It has to build on your strengths. It has to take care of your risks also. So a whole set of variables around that. I would say, I mean, a couple of things that are really important from a life space design perspective. I think one is I would say that your spouse and your tribe, the group of people you identify with, is really important because that drives a lot of meaning. That drives a lot of where you place yourself and what you see is worthwhile. Um, Another big piece is the vision you see for yourself and the world. And meaningfulness comes out of really seeing your own vision for the world being actualized. So that kind of is a second big component. Third is kind of using your own strengths to experience when you experience flow, when you experience the right level of challenge which engages you. So these are kind of couple of variables that constitute building some meaning into what you're trying to do, and that's what we try and design together in life space design, getting people to think through all of this, especially young people. That's where we primarily work, and really being able to say, okay, this is what I'd like to do. So yeah, so that's pretty much what I would say it is.
Yeah, I think that was a good intro to life space design. But I think we'd also like to know more about your own personal journey of, like, when you were starting out, how did you see the idea of uh, work or a job or a career, or building a career graph for yourself? How did you sort of think about those things?
Sure, sure. So I come from Mumbai and Gujarati family in Mumbai, and with other Gujarati friends. So entrepreneurship is kind of innate for us. And one of the things that happened for me and some of my friends was that we really enjoyed teaching. So by the time we were in 11th standard, we started teaching the 8th standard and kind of getting our pocket money out of running tuition classes, and then 8th standard that extended to doing tuition classes for the 10th standard while we were in college. So it's kind of early entrepreneurship experience, lot of fun to kind of have your own money, a lot of fun to the nitty gritties of running coaching classes and so on. So at that time, that was kind of the first taste, I would say, of doing something of our own. Um, Once I hit my B school and once I finished my MBA, there was again a question of saying, should I take up a job or should I really, do my own venture? And I think at that time, a lot of reflection happened. I think some very important decisions came from the thought that if it's really like saying that you make your choice, but the choice also makes you. When you make a choice, the choice further in turn impacts you. Uh, so it was a conversation with a dear friend talking about how if I do take up a job for a couple of years, it's also I'll not stay the same person that I am right now. I'll not necessarily have the same risk appetite and so on. So and that kind of inspired me to then step out, not take placement from campus, and again start my own thing. And that's about 15 years ago. From there, the journey has been increasingly to kind of unplug from the mainstream in as many ways. And when I say unplug from the mainstream, what I essentially mean is that there is a mainstream establishment that has a very violent economic system that relies on extraction, an economic system that relies on sucking out vitality from people. Um, and the alternative to that, really, what people call a livelihood, the alternative to that of living more consciously, meaningfully. So a lot of my journey has been about moving more and more towards that. In 2010, 11, restarted the Blue Ribbon Movement. Blue Ribbon Movement was a youth organization we were running in college. And 2010, I met a school friend. And at that time, I was still doing entrepreneurship, floating around, doing different things. And we both kind of connected on the need to do a social enterprise. And this is the time when social enterprises were really being born left, right, center. So felt that we could kind of, we could do three things. We could do something meaningful, work with friends, and make money in the process. So we said, why not start a social enterprise? So that's how Blue Ribbon kind of, in its second avatar, started as a social enterprise, doing programs for young people on civic and gender issues. Um, and yeah, and since then, I think the reflection has been more and more around what are the politics of social change? How does money impact action in the social space? And therefore, what should one do? How does one make a meaningful livelihood in these times, especially given my own family? And how does one balance the needs that are coming from family situations uh, and take up a profession? So it's been a constant negotiation. It's been a constant conversation. Today in my life, I have a very integral kind of form of earning, where there's a lot of work I do in gift economy or voluntary basis. There is stuff that I do on an honorarium basis. There are programs that I facilitate for a fee. Uh, and then I have a fellowship as well. So it's always a range of different sources from where I'm able to draw my finances, all in the pursuit of doing something meaningful.
Thank you, Abhishek, for that. I think,
Sure.
yeah, I think maybe I would like to ask Vivek next to just, um, we've kind of put the title of this webinar as uh, meaningful career. Just wanted to understand from you, like, um, what does that mean to you, like, or when you were starting out, did you think about, okay, my job or my work or sort of my career needs to be meaningful, and these are the 2 3 things that it needs to have for me to kind of say that, you know, I'm doing meaningful work. So just wanted to understand a little bit of your journey, your personal journey, um, with respect to work.
Right. Thanks, Adil. And I too come from a Gujarati speaking background, but I'm not in that sense culturally Gujarati. I speak the language. And similar to Abhishek, there is this expectation to pursue financial stability as perhaps the end in itself, and whatever means you need to adopt to get there is the normative. It is the generally accepted about this. Luckily, I was able to. I had the enabling environment to really question that, to experiment with some of the subversive ideas I had, which put the purpose of my life at the as the nucleus of all the thinking, and then just trusting that if you have your head in the right place and your heart in the right place, somehow the financial, not even the financial, the resources will be there, and finance is just one of the many resources. So I'll just briefly readdress the term career. I actually have some personal paralysis that happens when I hear that word, because it's almost like somebody saying that, oh, I want to write a book. You know, you can't really write a book. You can only write thoughts. You can only write sentences. You can only craft ideas. You can synthesize stories, and then it becomes a book. But I really do challenge that notion that you can commence with the idea of writing your life story in that very deliberate way and creating some sort of a personal history in that deliberate sense. So in reflection, it sounds like a career or whatever, but at least I haven't thought of it ever as this one monolithic, storyline which can be called a career. So I don't, these terms like career, graph, etc., don't really help me think, and so I don't really use these terms even when I speak. I like the idea of speaking about meaningful work, and not even job. Job is just a vehicle for us to do work. It need not even be a job. We might be very gainfully employed, but might be jobless. I have plenty of activist friends who are leading many direct action campaigns, blocking coal mines, for instance, blocking nuclear power, blocking airports in other parts of the world. They have no job, but they're extremely busy people. So there is this thing that you can be very, very involved, very, very gainfully employed, but not have a job. So that also is possible. Yes, specifically with my journey, I must say that what I must do with myself and what I felt very naturally gravitated towards occurred to me before I had very conscious ideas about job and career. So I was, I think, very, very fortunate in being infected very early with what I felt was the purpose of what I wanted to do. And I think in dialogues with you and with other Bhoomi team members in the past, I've mentioned that in hindsight, it turns out that what really animates my spirit in almost anything that I've done is the idea of responsibility. Being responsible for your actions, politically, personally, environmentally, and holding us accountable for the consequences of those actions. So helping make good decisions, helping make wise decisions, kind of like Paras is doing, for instance, and then making sure that society is able to hold the ones who have power and wealth, and especially, the privilege of good education, etc., accountable for the decisions that we make. And that's been sort of the common thread or the interweaving sort of theme across what I've done. And yeah, I can speak about the stories of Sea Balance, of course, how Sea Balance came about, etc. But I think we can get there, when there are specific questions about Sea Balance. I do have some thoughts that I've crafted about what it is to be meaningfully working in any sort of situation, as to how can we redefine these compartments of this is job and this is life, kind of like what Abhishek was alluding to, this idea of this elegantly composed, I wouldn't even say synthesized, elegantly composed life, which has these consonant elements which feed into each other, which reverberate with each other. And we're experimenting with some of these things in Sea Balance as a organism and not an organization. So we're trying to see, can a group of people function more like an organism, something that has life in it, rather than just an organization, which is perhaps more inert. So, yeah.
Sure, Vivek, would you like to go ahead and talk about one or two of those experiments?
Sure. I would like to start with one small passage by this farmer activist poet called Wendell Berry, and he speaks of this idea of economy and pleasure. If I can get a minute of everybody's time, this is in hindsight been almost a guiding for how to think about an economy which is more and more destitute of pleasure, and how restoring of pleasure, and not hedonistic pleasure, not just a very self-centered pleasure which says, okay, what makes me feel good, but can your definition of pleasure be pleasure for all, or the goodness good for all? So if you can bear with me, can I read that passage out?
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's from this essay called Economy and Pleasure, where Wendell Berry writes, more and more we take for granted that work must be destitute of pleasure. More and more we assume that if we want to be pleased, we must wait until evening or the weekend or vacation or retirement. More and more our farms and forests resemble our factories and offices, which in turn more and more resemble prisons. Why else would we be so eager to escape them? We recognize defeated landscapes by the absence of pleasure from them. We are defeated at work because our work gives us no pleasure. We are defeated at home because we have no pleasant work there. We turn to the pleasure industries for relief from our defeat and are again defeated. For the pleasure industries can thrive and grow only upon our dissatisfaction with them. Where is our comfort but in the free, uninvolved, finally mysterious beauty and grace of this world that we did not make, that has no price? Where is our sanity but there? Where is our pleasure but in working and resting kindly in the presence of this world? And in the right sort of economy, our pleasure would not merely be an addition or a byproduct or reward. It would be both an empowerment of our work and its indispensable measure. Pleasure, Ananda Kumarasamy said, perfects work. In order to have leisure and pleasure, we have mechanized and automated and computerized our work. But what does this do but divide us even more from our work and our products, and in the process from one another and the world? What have farmers done when they have mechanized and computerized their farms? They have removed themselves and their pleasure from their work. And later on in that passage, in that essay, he says, ultimately, in the argument about work and how it should be done, one has only one's pleasure to offer. It is possible, as I have learned again and again, to be in one's place in such company, wild or domestic, and with such pleasure that one cannot think of another place that one would prefer to be, or of another place at all. One does not miss or regret the past, or fear or long for the future, but there is simply all and is enough. Such times give one the chief standard and the chief reason for one's work. So I'll let that just sit for a second and just reflect on the idea of the pursuit of pleasure, but not in that selfish, parochially defined, my pleasure, destitute of the pleasure of the world, or divorced, like Abhishek put, divorced from all the other interconnectednesses that make us what we are and basically what life is about. So I think this is a very central theme in our conception of work. And I'll briefly just touch upon some of the experiments that we have been undertaking in C-Balance about work. And I think we need to go beyond just a value discussion, because values without a practice is just another pointless luxury. We can all espouse words about values, but unless we find a way to bring them into our hands, they remain in our head and our heart, and really doesn't affect the world as much as bringing it into practice would. So while we do have some values, which of course animate all of it, and I'll just briefly enumerate them. One is pleasure. The other value is the seeking of a head, heart, and hands balance in whatever we do. The idea of small is beautiful, where the size, your physical size, is inalienable from the amount of pleasure you can have in your work. I'm sure a lot of Bhoomi fellows, Bhoomi students, Bhoomi team members all agree that beyond a certain size, the mechanics or the machine of the industrial extractive world has no pleasure for us. Even at small scale, it is an absolute misery, but at larger scale, the misery is multiplied manifold, at least in the industrial context. The other value that we are looking to practice in creating of a workplace is the idea of commons, the idea of not being very secretive and being enclosures of common knowledge that has emerged from each other, from our processes, and sharing it with the world with a sense of trust, which brings us to the idea of trust, the idea that we must try to create a work environment where there is no surveillance, there is absolutely no checking of even background. So for example, when we hire new team members, we have a practice of never checking backgrounds, because that is essentially rooted in the experience, in the specific experiences that person has had with another, very often a controlling capitalist, because most of the people who come into organizations like us have at least had some, scars that they come from, they carry along with them from working in capitalist organizations. So we've questioned this idea. There's no surveillance of time spent, that you indicate in your timesheets and so on and so forth. So there are some practical manifestations of trust. The idea of humility, the idea of recognizing that people with money, power, education have to force themselves, even if it doesn't come naturally, to be extremely humble, to always be ready to be shown to be wrong, and always be ready to be shown the mirror by people with much less power and privilege, saying that you might have had great intent, but you have done damage unknowingly, inadvertently, despite great intentions. So I think humility is very essential, something which I feel is a very scarce quality amongst the uber confident, I know everything and I have great intention for society kind of. And I will say this, Ashoka fellows they bear this cross of not being able to practice humility. And I think it's very important as an organization to have humility. And then the final value that I'll state is psychological safety. So being able to create a system which functions like a team, where there are instances where there is some, I wouldn't say suspension of democracy, but where decisions are taken and there is some, inadvertent power play that does emerge. It emerges with every team, no matter how flat you want to make it, just because of traditions of age and traditions of experience, etc., where the power structure almost gets assimilated psychologically, and that does not create a very psychologically safe place for people to speak up. So I think creating of psychological safety is an important value as an organization. So these are the values. I can get into the praxis a little later. I think I've spoken for quite a long time, and I can imagine how my own voice sounds monotonous to me. So I can imagine how painful it is for others. So I'll get into the praxis of some of this perhaps later on in the call.
Thank you. Thank you, Vivek. It was really interesting to get a lowdown of all the values that you're looking to implement at C Balance. I think one of the values that you spoke about was the idea of commons and how you like to not keep probably knowledge, information closed and only for your organization. And so I think based on that, I would like to get Manvinder in here, who I think the idea of Kida that you've started is also kind of focused around this idea of commons and people working collaboratively on projects, probably across organizations, across cities. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what made you think about Kida, what made you start it, and what has been your own experience of working with various organizations for the past 8 years.
Hi. Yeah. So let me know if I'm not clear at some moment. So I think talking about background, I have a background. My family comes from agrarian background. The village I was born in, I was quite shocked when I grew up to see the village name on the newspaper, and the title was, like the most bonded laborers in India are in this district, and my village was featured in the list. My family is quite authoritarian, orthodox. Like we were not allowed to speak up growing up. There was no questioning. You couldn't you couldn't make choices. Choices were not an option. And hello, yeah. So choices were not an option. But as I was doing my engineering, I realized I wasn't happy. I was debarred from most of my exams. But what I really enjoyed was stealing question papers from staff room for my friends and sometimes answer sheet. I think eventually I realized that I just love helping people, and I left the college. Came to Bhoomi College. I was here. It was great for the first time. A space where I could just be myself and experiment without much controls, without much rules. It was odd. I wanted to be a farmer back then, so I thought, okay, let's go farm. I went back to my village, but the situation over there was quite bad. I couldn't survive with my relatives who were so controlling. Also, I was dating a girl back then who I wanted to marry, but she didn't want to marry a farmer. She didn't want to live in a village. So I thought, okay, fine, let me do something else. So I joined this international organization called Greenpeace, where I was joined as a sustainable agriculture campaigner. I did decent work for 2 years. Then I was a project leader. Being a project leader, just couldn't handle so much responsibility that came on my shoulder. And I think within like the same year, I left, burned out. I volunteered with ASHA for a couple of protests, and then I was burnt out again. And then somebody told me, if you really want to get away from here, why don't you go to the Himalayas? There's somebody working over there with a forest. I thought it was a good idea. So I went there. And for 3 years, I worked with the grassroots organization, working with the forest, working with the people. And last year, I left that. And this year, after being mostly jobless for a couple of months, I'm freelancing. So it's been a journey where I've been through a lot of different environments, seen a lot of things. And coming to all of it, one thing I realize is that there's some people, um, who just want to do good work. And it's very hard because wherever we go, there are always systems that follow. The systems in big organizations, there are systems in small organizations, there are systems in corporates, there are systems in non-profit corporates, all sort of things. So where do people who just want to do something good go? And I think that's where the idea of Kida came in. one fine day when I was sitting and talking to a friend of mine. Um, that's Adil. And yeah, so we imagine Kira to be a place where system was much more open, where people believed each other, trusted each other, and just worked with each other because they liked working with each other. And that's why we thought that let's start with an online platform. It's called Keeda.in, Keeda.in. We can put it in the chat. It's on just We're just like experimenting with a lot of things over there. We've changed 3 times already, to find a space where people can just come together, talk and share. We meet offline, we do things, so we just reach out to people. um, so the idea over there is that because people, like I feel isolated in this journey because I've been shunned by my parents. They still think I'm doing a stupid work. um, I've been broke most of my life. I haven't had enough money. um, but these are the choices I've made. And right now I'm living in the mountains, which is really beautiful. I live in Uttarakhand, but it can get tad lonely over here because we live with a community. It's great, but sometimes we don't have people with the same wavelength to talk to. So I think all these things. मैं call पे हूँ थोड़ी देर में, है ना? Okay, sorry. So I think like just wanted a space where people who want to work and learn new things can just be together. I think that's what Kira came from.
Thank you, Man, for that. I think maybe I'd like to get Paras in now. Somebody who also has had the experience of working and interning with many organizations in the alternative. Paras, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah. Would you like to just share a little bit about your own personal journey of how you've started out and how the journey has been for you working for the past 4-5 years?
Sure. The kind of work I'm doing right now with the communities whom I always wanted to touch base with are the farmers in Delhi, which I'm sure many people really are not aware that okay, farming happens in the capital of the country also. This was something which was very it really brought a lot of excitement in me when I went to this village known as Nangal Thakran. It's a village in the north district of Delhi. Just to introduce, rather me, I will introduce that village, which will really help people understand what has happened in the agrarian sector in the past 5 decades. I'm sure many people would have heard about the movie Upkar. It was a movie made on Manoj Kumar, where Mera Desh Ki Dharti Sona Ugle, that song is kind of well known across the world. That movie was shot in that village, Nangal Thakran. And I went to this village in December, last year, December. And when I went to that village from my place, it took me 1.5 hours from, let's say, Southwest District. And the village, the current setting is so bad, it looks like a remote village somewhere in the country because 4 or 5 kilometers from the main road and more than 20 kilometers from the city limits. When I use the word city limit, it means that people have access to basic facilities or the say commercial activities, anything which is different from a agrarian sector or a rural way of life. That sort of environment still exists. And I'm sure second part to the story is all of you remember about green revolution. We are talking about that we started using fertilizers, pesticides, chemical farming, and all that. The seeds of these farmings were sown in these villages. Jonte village is next to Nangal Thagran, just few kilometers away. I'm talking about the periphery of Delhi. So these villages touch border with Haryana, and these were the villages where all these farming techniques were experimented with rice and wheat. So I'm talking about the 1960s, 70s. So imagine whatever bad we could do with the farmers all happened there. And now in the past 30, 40 years, people have moved on. Younger people have come into this whole sector of development sector, we say social enterprise or any sort of a professionalism. But these villages still exist as they were. People are growing wheat, mustard in these villages, which is really not feasible because there's no market. No, you can't expect Delhi government or central government to buy wheat and mustard from a city-based farmer. They would definitely be more interested in the remote areas so that I can cater to the farmer's need of daily income and like that. In these villages, people have no water source because water level is depleted, and no professionalism has entered their way of life. People really don't know what to do with farming. Very few people who have the courage to take up organic farming. People are doing it, but again, they had some kind of a backup, as we're talking about. No, there has been an enabling environment. Somebody took up engineering, or somebody in the family took up a job, or that person went away from the homely atmosphere, and that's how I was attached to them, the farmers over there, and I started talking to them, working with them, because I also come from an urban village in Delhi. Our land was, my ancestral land was acquired in the 1960s. And by the time I was born, the village was a modern village, modern urban village. So I kind of brought more modernity to the village. And I have lived the lifestyle of a village which was kind of going away with a traditional way of life work. Like I remember cattle in the house. I remember it, but now it's no more there because we don't have that kind of facilities all around. Like we cannot leave cattle for somewhere to graze because it's not a concrete jungle. So government policies took away our way of life. That's the agriculture way of life, agricultural society. Now we are like a urban village, although the community still lives there for the past 4 centuries, 5 centuries. And all the villages in Delhi, they are more than 600 years old, and people are not getting opportunities. So I just started working with them. The last part of the work is so good that during the lockdown, what I came to know was through media stories again that farmers are throwing their tomatoes on the road. The vegetables are not going anywhere. Like somebody, like everybody's in a very sad state of mind. Luckily, I being from the same community and I got to have access to these technologies when you talk Zoom, WhatsApp. Along with my friends from different villages in Delhi, we formed a WhatsApp group. We brought all the produce from the farms in the periphery of Delhi. I'm talking organic produce. Like there are farmers, young farmers, who are growing organic farming produce like vegetables and fruits like melon, muskmelon, and watermelons. So we were able to bring this from farms to families in many societies in Delhi, where we know as gated communities. Luckily, from the first day of 100 kg of fruits, we were able to touch 400 kgs of regular supply for almost 2 3 weeks. So it was so successful that I was so happy that this young farmer, he was a farmer's son, the person who was bringing these produce from the village to the city, and they could see success in farming. And I could hear his words because his father used to call me in the night to say, "I'm so happy. I have never really thought that farming can be so much profitable." And what exactly I did was I just connected the farmer to the family, which we are talking about recently. The government of India has also launched the same kind of a public policy that they want to give freedom to the farmer to bring his or her produce directly to the purchaser or a consumer. So this is a success. I just want to focus on that. Cycle is a policy advocacy organization I started after doing my master's in public policy. Before that, some time back, I had done this sustainability course in Bhoomi. It was 2012 and 13. So you can imagine me also like a Manvendra who was in college and who was really not happy with the kind of decisions we were making somewhere. Be it, I was a BSc Physics honors student, and the options I had was either a MTech or a MSc or something. I had qualified for them, but I was not happy. And luckily, I could just decide and go to Bhoomi. I really don't know how it happened because on Google I saw Bhoomi College and I saw somebody is offering some courses which I'm eligible for and I can pay for that. So let me just pack my bags and go from Delhi to Bangalore. Good weather and good city, and nobody knows you. Just go there and do what you want to do. So that paved the path first initially years, and after that, doing my internship with Selco again. I think people in the city should realize. Imagine tribal people or people who are living in remote areas. They're able to sustain their way of life and they are able to restrict the carbon emissions because they are having the access to decentralized solar energy. And we living in the cities, we again are the ones who are actually paying for electricity via coal. So when we are talking about these activism which is happening in the country now, that we don't want coal and we don't really need these not very good source of energy, we are the actual consumer. So if we really cannot come together and raise our voice against these initiatives, what exactly we are doing? The tribal person or a person in the rural village in Karnataka, they are easily having this small solar system in their house and enjoying their life. They don't need any power grid supply. So that was a lesson I learned, like look back, long back, that how people living in different ways, away from the city or away from decision making of government, which is bad, they're able to do something good. All they need is enabling environment. So Swelco was providing them. And after doing my master's in public policy, which I felt the need for, because unless you are aware about rules in the country, you really cannot do much, because government has all the power and all the, let's say, decisions in their bag that they can stop you. So that decision was also taken. Luckily, I got the opportunity to be the first batch of masters in public policy in National Law School. And after that, I did some work in some associations and not-for-profits. And I came back to my roots, which are in an urban village. And I decided what best I can do right now. I don't have farmlands, but okay, I have some sort of infrastructure, let's say enabling environment, which is helping me out, that I can easily go to the farmers nearby the city and associate with them in a way where I call it professionalism. It's all about support system, that I'm just offering them something which helps them. And farmers, we really don't think, because I was reading much literature about farming in India and how people criticize the policies. Everywhere people talk about farmers are not enterprising when we talk about majority of them. So the question which I really think is, how come people think that farmer can be an enterprising person when the person cannot even sell his own produce, though his own crop in the market at the price he wants? So you imagine you have made a farmer so in a kind of a vicious cycle of decision making that that person really cannot do much. So that was our one lesson I learned. And thank you so much for offering this webinar. Thank you, Adil. Thank you, Bhoomi College. I hope many people can decide wisely in their this sector, what to do with their lives.
Thank you. Thank you, Paras. I think
I have a question
now.
for Paras. Just one very specific question for Paras. Can I ask? No?
Sure, Vivek.
Paras, the policy that you mentioned that supports and fosters this farmer to consumer sort of linkage. What is the policy? And is it a national policy or is it a Delhi state government policy?
Recently, central government has come with a notification that they want to offer, rather MSP, they want farmers to directly sell their produce in the country. So there are no restrictions of APMC, which we know as agricultural produce marketing committees. So again, just offering them business to consumer or business to the right, the let's say buyer from a farmer.
Okay.
And it happened. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Can you just name? Is there a name and date for this order, just so that we can leverage it in the creating of our narrative for encouraging farmers and communities to use this?
Yes.
Order.
I will share that with Adil, and perhaps he can turn it directly to you.
If you can, because this is an area of great interest for us actually.
Yes.
In working with Navdarshanam and yes, yeah, okay.
Thank you, Paras. I think I would like to get Sita in now. I think we heard from 4 people who have kind of taken that journey and are quite into it, like more than 5 years, more than 10 years, more than 15 years. But there is a lot of knowing oneself that is sort of needed before you kind of can figure out what are your values, where do you want to really contribute, what are you good at. So the convergence of really figuring out in that ikigai sense, that the convergence of elements in terms of passion, what am I good at, what does the world need. So having worked with really youngsters for the past 2-3 decades, like what would you say is needed for that knowing oneself that people need to kind of go through before they can really take the jump and start working?
Thank you, Adil. I missed the first few minutes of your introduction, and I seem to hear all the four people before me first share their personal story or something. Is that something that you had asked us all to do? Or I
Yeah,
can
yeah,
skip?
yeah. I think you missed that because there was some tech issue from your
Right.
end. But yeah,
So do
so
you want me to say that, or do I answer your question?
no, you can start with your personal journey. I think, and the idea, because we put it in the context of how did you see the idea of work, doing work, and so you can start with that and then get to.
Okay. Okay. Um, Regarding, like, work and words like meaningful career or even career is something I sort of completely was absent in my life when I grew up. You know, it's not just because I was a girl, and nobody in my school or college really ever talked about careers. You know, a few people did get into some career or the other. There were many who, got married and became housewives. So you can imagine, you know, how many years back, about 40 years back, that was a situation in a small town of Coimbatore where I grew up. And my family too, there was absolutely no talk about what we should do and how we should succeed, or there was nothing of that kind. And I think we okay and I think we kind of uh, grew up because, at one level there was this thing of, it was in most people living in those kind of small towns, where two couple of generations before you had also been in cities, and there was a house, you can live there as long as you want, and there was always food available. So we grew up without a sense of insecurity, but at the same time there was absolutely no push for us to do anything. And I think I had a father who believed everything was a matter of fate. If you studied well or you got into a career, that was your fate. If it wasn't, so there wasn't this kind of frenzy about careers at all, or even leave alone anything meaningful or any such thing. And I think to some extent, I feel that not programming the kids for anything is probably the best thing for them. Let them discover what they want to do or what they don't want to do. You know, and however, that's sort of easier said than done. We are living in a somewhat more, becoming oriented culture rather than a being oriented culture. And everywhere you see, even from very small classes, parents are planning what the child will do later and so on. And uh, to connect that with how I grew up and what I wanted to do, I think I was lucky that I could spend a lot of time in the mountains with nature and so on. So not having the usual, I mean, the modern kind of, what do you call it, preoccupation with where I should work or what should be my career. I could just feel that whatever I do, I must do it connected with nature, be close to nature, and so on. Um, and today, frequently people are using the word monetize. At least in my life, there have been people talking about monetizing. That's a word we never knew. We never bothered to monetize anything. We just lived day to day and looked at what we wanted to do and did it. So I feel somewhere being with nature, being with people who are not sort of trying to program you into doing something or the other, all that gives you, perhaps, I'm just kite flying, and I think that would help you foster a sense of intuition and a sense of wholeness and a sense of what I want in my life rather than anything about a career. You know, what I the kind, and it makes you think about life in general, all the happenings. There are things that upset you, things that are painful, things that are, all sorts of things happen, and you weave them all into kind of the learnings from that into your life. And I think that sort of can help us, give us a more kind of view of life, what I want, how I want to live, rather than how anything about a career, meaningful or otherwise. And then your career in the modern situation, if you have to have one, it kind of um, is in a more meaningful context of your life. And I think some others said that. I think Vivek said some such thing, and others too. That uh, can we now, to come to your question about children and youngsters, um, can we give that gift to children and youth, to be able to find what they want to do in life, or how they want to enjoy life, and so on, rather than even think too much about careers. And I like what somewhere I came across Kumarappa, you know um, uh, saying, work is to the soul what food is to the body. So if work is something that is intrinsically meaningful for you, rather than, like, again, it's been already said here, that I think it was from the quote of Wendell that the work is so painful that you wait for a weekend to party, or to replenish yourself with going out or being with family or something. How do I, if I really care for myself, care for my well-being, and even for the well-being of the world, I have to learn to look at essentials for myself. And I think that is one thing which is all kinds of things are crammed into children's heads. But how do I sift out what is essential? Not only for me myself, yes, but also, it may be essential for me to work with in a way which I enjoy myself, or some such thing. I may need to also earn something, but all can I have both together, rather than one at the cost of the other, or something to do with my community, or something to do with the world. What is essential for the world today? We are in a position today where if we really want to look at meaningful careers, we also have to look at what creates well-being for the world, or for the community, or for the commons near me, and so on. It's no more, the kind of view of life somewhere has to give me a moral compass, and that moral compass has to include what is essential for survival and for sustainability today, and so on. And I would imagine that, again, it doesn't make sense to sort of persuade people into it, or demand that that happens, but possibly offer the kind of context, offer uh, enough sharing, or offer connections with inspiring people who care to do something, to give, and rather than only see what I can get. And especially, it's not even what I can get. It's become so, careers have become so monetized, if I can use the word, that it's only about how much I can earn. And the moment I do that, I am compromising on, caring for my well-being. So I feel, if schools and colleges, it's a bit much to think about colleges also in India, trying to look at it that way, but at least schools trying to offer spaces where people can talk about, what makes for well-being, offer spaces where people can discuss what is life all about, what do I want out of life, and such things, rather than only a kind of exam-oriented approach. So a lot of conversations, a lot of sharing, a lot of meeting interesting people. I think all this will be good for children, and that's the best we can do. It's very difficult to take out the the career frenzy of today, but perhaps it's better, rather than to eliminate that, just try to add just add on this beckoning of um, a more interesting and even joyful, meaningful way of living life. And yeah, that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Sita, for that. You mentioned kind of exposure to people who are doing great work, organizations. So that kind of an ecosystem sharing. I think before we open the floor for questions, I would like to get Abhishek in. Uh, for me, BRM, Blue Ribbon Movement, kind of works on that uh, philosophy. So it works with youngsters, a really young team working with youth, for youth. So maybe Abhishek, you would like to quickly talk about how work happens at BRM. How is that experience, and how have you kind of imagined it and seen it happen?
Yeah, sure. The start of Blue Ribbon had a lot of people quitting us, and suddenly not showing up the next day, or saying yes to offers and not coming. And we were really left wondering what the hell is going on. Why aren't we being able to get these young people? Why aren't we being able to retain these young people? And eventually we figured that this has to do with culture, and really building a culture where you get high performing individuals to stay. How does one do that? And so got a couple of ingredients in. We definitely got in a lot of fun. We figured that for young people to engage at work, if work is fun, then there is a lot more. So a lot of at Blue Ribbon there would be a lot of regular kind of parties and celebrations, and just a generally appreciative culture. Really lifting up spirits. The second was we figured a deeply personal connection. So if we're able to connect very deeply, and not just so for us, we definitely don't believe in keeping such a work-life separation. It's more work and life kind of integrated into a whole. So it's not only colleagues, but really we're friends of each other. We're involved with each other's lives at a very deep level. Blue Ribbon has a history of couples being formed and people getting married and all as well. So it's that kind of deep connections that also really benefited people. And then we figured that bright people attract bright people. So there is always also a value to just your colleagues being on the edge, pushing themselves, and that creates a culture of everybody trying to do well. Um, the metaphors we use also, we use BRM family as a metaphor. It's always the BRM family. It's never BRM the workplace. It's never BRM the organization. And that's deeply ingrained, the idea of the BRM family as well. So everybody really working or literally being like one family that chooses to do things together, chooses to jam together. So some of these were ingredients to making life at BRM. We call it the BRM life because then it integrates into all aspects of your life. You're doing personal practices because you're a part of Blue Ribbon. So you start doing personal practices in life. Your interactions also, the language and how you engage with each other starts getting impacted. So it really gets into all areas of it. That's what we figure.
Thank you, Abhishek, for that. So now I think would
Can
like
I
to
add something to that?
Yeah, absolutely, Manvinder. I forgot this is a discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. So I think for me, I'm like through all this conversation, I've come to realize that alternative career is basically making choices that we have denied our own selves. Just because they sounded impractical, unsafe, not sustainable. Like for example, going somewhere, like wishing that you would spend their life there, but telling no to yourself. No, now I have to go back to a certain world. Like being, planning to work with little kids, but knowing that your coding is more important because it's more looked up to. So I think when we make those alternative career choices, a lot of personal revolution.
Hello,
I think
Manvin.
Manvinder dropped off. There must have been an issue, internet issue. But yeah, I think Vivek, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to, yes. So, Manvendra is back. Okay. Saved by the bell.
Manvender, and then maybe Vivek, you can go next.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, it happens. The mountains. So for me, it's
Can
like
we
it's
have
a lot of
can
like,
we have a quick look of the vista from your balcony?
okay, fine. Yeah, it's actually quite pretty. I had to lock myself in because the kids were coming from the neighborhood. No. Okay, that's where I live. Um, this is a small village called Kaflang, and that is a choice we've made. So that's an alternative choice, living where nobody goes. So we don't have weekends anymore. So that's for me what alternative career is. It's just like making all those decisions that you were always afraid that you couldn't make, and being at the end of the day being very happy with yourself. There are like perks and downsides, as I talked about, and sometimes you're really broke. But the good thing is that you don't need much to sustain over here. Like life is so cheap, you can live off on like 3,000 rupees a month. So it's that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Manvendra, it's all downhill from there. You know that, right? It's all downhill.
Yeah, it's all downhill from there.
Yeah, Vivek, you can go next.
It's
Yes.
good. Like, yeah, just one more line. Like for example, like right now we are I'm doing a freelance, and we are hosting in a workshop on Miyawaki forest, and we did an open source gift-based workshop, and over 250 people signed up for it. So sometimes even have not having organizations to work for, where your lot of priorities goes into that. Also, I think can be liberating way of working on your own, but you're working with a lot of different people who are all working on, but together towards a common goal. So that's another form of alternative career for me. That's all.
Thank you, Man.
Great. Thank you, Manvendra, also for being a sport. I just wanted to rub it in a little bit because we live in such a beautiful place, so I had to come back. Okay. So I wanted to say two things. One is I see we're having a lot of discussion about the personal, about the specific scale, the locus at which we are speaking of is the organization, is the family, is the person. I think it's also important to recognize, especially for people who are working in the realms of ecology and looking at the violent economic system that Abhishek has spoken of, which we don't need to theorize about it. We know that we are living in one, largely. There are, of course, margins that we are all exploring, but recognizing the fact that we are situated in a largely exploitative political economy. So I think it's important for us to also expect ourselves to know a little bit about the organizations that we choose to either start or to work in, what its politics is. I think this is a very important consideration that I often feel people in the alternative realm, because we often not exposed to that kind of critical thinking. We don't ask those kinds of questions, and people might say, oh, what has politics got to do with my ecology or my ecological organization? But everything is political. Everything, it comes from a viewpoint. There is no such thing as apolitical anything. The only reason why it might not be mentioned is because it's so mainstream, it's so ubiquitous that you don't even call it that. It's like we all breathe, air, but we don't often say that, oh, I'm breathing nitrogen and oxygen, but because it's the very fabric of what we are. So if our lens is that, we can't really see the lens through which we look at the world, but it is a political lens as well as personal. And so I think this is important. So this leads me to the question of asking this, I think, very vital question to understand the political relationships in the organization that you either start or you work in, is the idea of who is profiting. So even if it's a non-profit, right? The question of how is the power and the wealth distributed in the organization is a very important part of educating yourself to about what you are getting into or what you are about to start. So the question of who is profiting, because we can all fool ourselves that we all are altruistic, and with our altruism, we will just solve the world. But if you haven't structurally looked at the altruistic mechanisms and how you're going to achieve that altruistic outcome, then I think it is a little naive and a little, it's not a very examined approach to the idea of work, considering that work is in some way organized in the economy. So this brings me to some of the other ideas that we've been experimenting with at C-Balance, and then I'll very quickly just go through this, and then I'll leave the floor open because we have about 40 minutes for the call to conclude. So one is, how do we bring those values into praxis? So one is, for example, for the heart part. So we said that we like to think of our work lives to some degree comprised of these three very animating influences on us: our head, heart, and hand. So for the heart, for instance, we've started doing focusing a lot on facilitation, the kind of work that Abhishek does, for instance, and recognizing that groups need facilitation to be able to have healthy dialogue where we are able to explore some uncomfortable areas in ourselves, in our group, resolving or recognizing that there are some conflicts, but which can be addressed in a non-violent, joyous, and very mature way. So I think facilitation is a big part of maintaining our spiritual and heart balance. Also recognizing that, so this actually comes from a personal experience as, working in an environmental organization, many years ago, there were many days when, I would be too happy to go to work, but I would have to lie and say that, oh, you know what, I'm sick. I can't come to work because, I'm not well. And I would have to sort of fabricate this whole story as, oh, okay, it's because of some headache that I had. And I realized that this actually becomes a seed of lying to yourself and lying to your organization. So we crafted, for example, this idea of what's called a happy day leave, which is too happy to work. And I think this recognizes our humanity, recognizes our spontaneity, that not everything can be programmed. You can't always program that on this day everybody is going to show up to work. So we're trying to experiment with these ways of being real and authentic in working with each other. Then for the head, we are trying to make sure that every year we give our team members and recognize the fact that we need to develop our minds. So study time, for instance, where every year a couple of weeks of paid leave to explore something of a very formal educational nature. If you choose to, for example, if you want to do a 2-week course at Bhoomi, I don't know if you'll have that, but there is this option of being able to do that. So I think fostering that kind of culture of learning for maintaining our intellectual curiosity and keeping us sharp in the head, for instance. Also having lots of lunch and learns where each one of us becomes a trainer for the rest of the team for whatever we've learned either through projects or through, these kinds of courses that we've attended, for instance, or, things that we've been doing on the weekends, which have to do with developing our minds and hearts. For the hands, we've been looking at this idea of unpaid household work, which we all are now recognizing has been going on. There has been a subservient class of people, and most often it's the women who've been doing a lot of unpaid, unrecognized, unappreciated household work to keep our households going. And this is all part of the economy. Without functioning households, without functioning families, our economy can't work. So it actually is a part of the economy. And I think we all are learning this now. So for example, we're trying to experiment with this idea where 1 hour of the 8-hour work day, quote unquote, is paid housework. So this supports our hands and its involvement in all kinds of things, not just this highly intellectual and highly valued conventional economic work of just thinking, right? Which is important as well. We're also trying to, we also have this idea that we've been experimenting with for a few years now called own time, where 1 day out of 2 weeks, 1 full day is for unprogrammed, whatever you want to do. If it's reading, a bunch of books, reading a bunch of papers, or engaging with the local community on a waste management project, or growing food in the urban area as part of your experiment in urban resilience, whatever it is that you want to do, which has a character which is interconnected with community. So it can't just be, oh, I'm just learning to play the guitar. Of course, you can do that, but that's not an own time project. So for instance, I run this organization called Inform Voter Project. I'm part of that. So for me, for example, that is my own time project on most days. We're also experimenting with low carbon living ourselves personally, and also as an organization, to make sure that we renounce all the practices as far as possible, which we know are damaging and are only being upheld through some sort of self-defense and through some sort of story making for ourselves, saying that, oh, we can exclude ourselves from these same things that we've been preaching to the world, right? Which is something that a lot of green entrepreneurs, etc., do. They legitimize the same practices which they denounce in the public realm. And finally, in terms of organizational and structural values and practices, also asking the kind of questions as to who is the owner in the organization, even if they're not physically present. So this idea of proxy ownership, lots of organizations are owned by proxy investors who basically make unearned income from your labor, from your work, and from the capital that they've invested in you, which is just basically the idle money growing automatically. This happens a lot, even in sustainability-oriented enterprises, for instance. So I think it's important to hold that in mind when we're choosing our employment, our career, of starting something of our own. The idea of non-specialization and recognizing how specialization has led to this culture of outsourcing everything, where each one of us can only do a small part of our own living. The rest of it is outsourced very often to corporations. So questioning this idea of hyper-specialization in the organization, where almost everybody in the organization can do almost everything over a period of time. Doesn't mean that we don't have specific competencies, but being watchful of over-specialization or too much specialization. The next is dignity of labor, not differentiating between high work and low work. So we really have contempt almost for this wala culture, which is there in organization, that you have a chai wala who brings in your chai, and then you have a housekeeping staff that cleans your toilet, and creating this whole meaningless work where people are just in servitude to you, basically, so that you can live your life. So questioning that at the organization level. So we don't really have this kind of culture, and even administrative staff. We don't have formal administrative staff who are just filing accounts day in and day out and doing this mundane work of taxes and those kinds of things. Representative democracy, having complete transparency and trust of the finances and of the decision making. So everything is made available. Everybody knows how much each other makes. So there's no secrecy. It's all, to some degree, it's been dumbed down to the level of a simple calculator, for instance, how much money anybody makes. So we have a simple salary calculator, and that's it. Everybody has to submit to that. So the values of the organization are embedded in the calculator, and then we don't discuss it. But there's a lot of debate in developing that, of course. Then value-based recruitment, not recruiting just based on skills, because skills can be learned, but values are far more important in grounding us to work well, to do good work for not just for ourselves, but for everything that supports our life on this planet. Then equity, making sure that there is a certain meaningful ratio of the maximum income that somebody earns in your organization versus the lowest income, because we can't hope to become a more equal society if we don't model and we don't emulate that in our own organizations. At least it's very clear that you can't have an organization that is rooted in inequity and basically uses inequity as the way to create some sort of a career ladder, and then putting us on that career ladder and then hoping to have an equal society when you have income disparities within the own organization, which are just preposterous. So I think these are some important values that organizations should perhaps consider putting into practice if they really want to walk the talk of meaningful work for everybody. And so sorry if I've been a little harsh over there with prescribing things, but these are all just experiments, and I think some team members of C-Balance are even on the call, so they can ask me to shut up if any of this is just theorizing. So yeah.
No, thank you, Vivek, for that. I think we've already started getting questions, so just wanted to let everyone know that if they have a question, they can either raise their hand or just unmute themselves and ask, or use the chat box. We've already got a couple of questions. One is, how do we convince parents that we want to do meaningful work and not conventional, and not have a conventional mainstream career. Manvinder, Paras, still in their 20s, those memories might be fresh. So do you want to take a stab at? Yeah.
I can take a quick one. Yeah, so I'm a global laureate fellow. So one of the internationally recognized youth who have been working towards change, and yet my parents disapprove of the choices I make. It's very hard to convince parents because they come from their own systems where success has different reference. My sister and my brother-in-law, they work for very big corporates and they make tons of money. So every time like somebody asks them, okay, like how much say how much your daughter earns, he tells. But if they ask how much his son earns, it's very difficult for him to tell. So I think it's very hard, and there might be if you decide to follow this path that you love, there would be paths where you would end up hurting your parents, and you will probably have to say no to them about certain things. But what really works is that keeping the communication open. I think that's one of the most important part, because as you evolve and grow into the career choosing, uh, they get to learn you better. The more you struggle with each other and the choices that you're grappling with, the more they come to understand you and the more you come to understand them. So I think if you try to convince your parents and then you'll do what you want to do, you'll always be stuck. But you keep doing what you want to do, and at the same time always keep the communication channel open with home. It's going to be tough, but hopefully things work out. Like, they haven't really worked out well for me, but it does for a lot of people.
Thank you for that honest answer, Man. Sita, maybe there is a question that you could reply to. I think Siddharth has asked a question saying, for someone that wants to live, work outside the system, but also wants to change some of the larger aspects of the mainstream system, how do we reconcile with that? Especially considering that, widely speaking, it's too late to tinker with the system, and we may need radical change really to get back on track.
Yeah. See, by this word system has been thrown up so many times, and I imagine that people are talking about only systems that are oppressive, because large systems by their very nature need to live by rules and regulations, and therefore they cannot please everybody. They end up being, but yet if uh, we want to work as a large group, and it may be possible to do certain kind of experiments like what Vivek talked about, but somewhere, no matter what, as the organization or ecosystem as we call it here, grows, there are it's a kind of trade-off we need to make. If we work alone or work within a system or create a system. So somewhere to understand that it is a tightrope walk. I can choose to work alone, in which case my impact, my ability to do something in the world is that much smaller in scale, which is fine. There's absolutely no compulsion about working on a large scale. But I think Siddharth said something about, yeah, there is what if I want to look at the macro system too? Yeah, maybe one can write, one can do certain things. There are people in theater who are trying to, what do you call it, create awareness in so many ways through music and so on. But certain other kind of work, like for instance, say in Bhoomi College or in a school, we can't do much in today's kind of world, where you want to not have a school for 10 children, but you want your efforts to touch a few more, let's say a few hundred children and so on, without becoming a factory school. So somewhere it's a tightrope walk. And one of the things that I look at it as having to ride two horses sometimes. And, Vivek talked about, yes, we are, no matter what, whether we want to own up anything to do with politics or not, whatever we do has a political aspect to it. And if, to share, for instance, what we are doing in Bhoomi, the school, the school that Prakriya Bhoomi is connected to runs a bit more on a capitalist mode. We may do a lot of things to you know to connect with all kinds the staff, the support staff, the teachers, different kinds of people. We do a lot of self-level work. A lot of things are being done, but yet at the end of the day, there are surpluses being made. And being a non-profit organization, I mean, it's a not-for-profit organization. What we do is a kind of a Robin Hood model. Use that for our various other programs, even to support Bhoomi College. Bhoomi College is just no hopes of breaking even with its costs, because it can't. The kind of work we do, we don't want to get into that. So we do alternative in some ways. We have to do mainstream in some ways, and it is riding two horses. It is not easy, in a different context, like Manvendra said. It's not easy to work with parents who belong to a different paradigm, and you belong to a different paradigm. That again is like two horses. Maybe communication is all that connects, is what he's saying. Here again, what I want to say is, if you want to work alone without being part of a system, you got to choose your work accordingly. But if you want to work with only in things where you can you can reach out to a larger number of people, or in Bhoomi, our interest was in creating a multiplier effect by by working and by providing the space and for people to co-create, work together, and build their own lives and careers, so to speak. So for that, it's not we cannot really have that luxury of the space or the work or the number of people consistently working over a long period of time. That all that doesn't happen without the kind of funding that the mainstream world only is able to provide. Or you'll have to work with a lot of other organizations. I know they get funds from different sources, be it abroad, be it India, whatever. So we need to understand realistically what it involves, to have a organization of larger number of people. Do I want to work there, or do I want to be freelancer most of the time? Yeah.
Thank you, Sita. I think Ria had a question about does wanting a meaningful career. Sorry, Vivek.
Just one thing to just perhaps have Siddharth ponder is that sometimes these boundaries of the alternative and the mainstream seem very rigid, but they are actually not. It's like, when you look at newsprint and you go really close, it's actually dots. There's a lot of porosity there. At least at the human level, there's a lot of porosity. And recognizing that we are actually beings in transition. So our feet are in capitalism, our feet are in exploitative systems. I need to, even if I buy a bicycle, it's perhaps come from some exploitative mining system. Right? So our feet are in it, our heads can be somewhere. So recognizing the duality and the challenges of being beings in transition, I think it's very important to recognize that we are that. We are that transitional society. Maybe we are returned to landers, but we are returned to landers. We are not off the landers just yet. Right? So it might take a few generations till we reconceive of our life and make it regenerative in all aspects. So recognizing that this is a situation for a lot of us.
Yeah. Thank you, Vivek. Does wanting a meaningful career mean starting or doing something on our own? I think Manvinder answered on chat, but if Abhishek or Paras, anyone would like to chime in.
Yeah, I can go on that one for sure. I mean, obviously, definitely not in the sense that starting on your own has a lot of advantages. I would say, especially those amongst us who are very idealistic. When you start on your own, you can have something precisely customized to your own beliefs, your own values, and you can stand behind it to say, this is what I really believe in. And I kind of belong to that camp vis-a-vis Blue Ribbon, vis-a-vis South Asian Youth Conference, and other kind of things that I started as well. So there is a joy in that kind of saying that this is what me, this is my tribe, and so on. And yet, I would say meaningful careers are kind of anywhere possible. I had a friend who was in a very mainstream career, and he evoked Ramakrishna Paramhans, saying that, I do this as my duty, as my dharma. And it was quite a revealing moment for me to think about the fact that somebody who's in a bank can actually approach their work with certain sacredness, a certain a certain detachment even. And in fact, I would say that there are professions where the value of a honest professional gets magnified simply because everybody around is dishonest, or simply because everybody around is not contributing. So I would in fact say that we need great lawyers, we need great police people, we need great people in the government also. So I would definitely say that so much of it is about finding a niche somewhere. Also, over time, I'm seeing that founders are overrated. So over time, I think the market is balancing itself. There was a time when founders were kind of the be all end all and getting to speak about everything and representing everything. But I think particularly with this next generation of people, I think people are very cool about not having started their own and taking something forward and saying, hey, this is mine and as mine as the founders. So I think that's also kind of started to become a norm, ownership, really, so that nobody has to give you ownership, you can claim ownership. So, yeah.
Thank you, Abhishek, for that. I think Anita had a question about what are the networks or platforms where we can explore our interests. Um, I don't know in what area she was talking about. Anita, maybe would you want to ask the question a little bit more in detail? Interest as in related to alternative careers or paths that you can take. Um, Maybe Manvinder, Sita would like to talk about EcoShare Wisdom or even Kida or some other platforms that are available. There is an Indian Multiversity Alliance that gives you alternative careers. Okay, so Anita was asking about alternative careers.
Yeah. Should I
I
go?
think
Yes, Sita. Sita and Man, both of you can
You
go
go
ahead.
ahead. You go ahead.
no, I was just suggesting that it's often going into spaces where a lot of these alternatives meet, like the LSUC, Learning Society and Conference, and other spaces where you can network and meet people. Because it's so good to have a mentor when you get into this field. Somebody who has been there, done that. Because a lot of people are just interconnected in this sector. It's a very small sector. So if you can just like find one or two people who are ready to guide you in this field, it's much more easier because they can always refer to you to the right person. And for me, I think that's quite effective.
Uh, Thanks, Manvendra. I think I wanted to say something similar. Nothing like finding out for yourself by going around meeting people. And like you said, it's quite easy to nowadays to track down many people doing interesting things and different organizations, different spaces. And that's it. And I think as you go along, something will emerge for you. And there are no, no one answer to this kind of a question. Each one has to find what works for them.
Thank you, Sita. I think Siddharth had another question. When deciding on work job, do you think it's important to take some time away from commitments to introspect, to gain clarity on next steps as opposed to figuring out engaging work and letting work itself give you perspective? Anyone would like to?
Adil, whose question is that? Sorry.
Siddharth.
I would definitely sort of vote in favor of taking time out and gap years and so on. Particularly again with this generation of young people that I've worked with, I've seen that when people take even 3 months, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months dedicated break, I've seen people come back with much more clarity because work itself has its own. It occupies mind space. It occupies things. So unplugging has helped, and that's what I have seen happen. So I would definitely say there's value to taking dedicated unplugged time out and then reflect and see what's happening. Yeah.
Manvinder, Paras, Vivek, anybody can join. Sita?
Yeah, Just to add to that, I think also, uh, soul searching can be a very individual process, but also there are spaces today where to kind of figure out, like, some of the deeper, emotional issues, connects that we have, because all strong action, deep action, has an emotional element to it also. And sometimes our emotions are all sort of covered up by all kinds of various meanings that the world has given us and we've adopted as our own. To find some time to relook at our lenses and filters with which we look at the world, to kind of look at, learn in totally different ways by, looking for these spaces where you can work with the self. And there are a few of them today. We work with Sankalan and Bhoomi also. We do a series of programs. So it doesn't have to be a program. It could be your own individual journey as well. But normally, when there are a few more people who are part of the journey, you don't get to see your own blind spots. Whereas in a group or other people, if it's a safe space to work with, if it's a enriching space where everybody is on this kind of a journey of self-exploration, there is a lot that can happen to, that can give us our own insights. This is the kind of space which will be a non-prescriptive, non-judgmental space, but yet a space where a lot of sharing can happen. And these spaces, I have found that many people really, start looking at things with new eyes.
Thank you, Sita, for that.
I just wanted to add one thing to that response to Siddharth is also, this seems to make it sound like a linear process also, that you take some time off to introspect, then you make a decision, and then you go all out. It doesn't perhaps recognize that even the ones who've quote unquote figured the answers out, without an inward journey simultaneously with your outward public political journey, without that you have no anchor. So introspectiveness, I think, is an attribute. I think introspectiveness is not just a process; it's an attribute that I think always makes us more human and more present in our world. Even though it sounds like it's actually an escape, it's seen as a retreat, but it's actually how to be better in the world. So I think cultivating some introspectiveness practices around it forever can't be, I think, argued against. I think it's, yeah. I just wanted to add that it's not like you stop the introspection the moment you have some sort of answer. Yeah. And just one note about an anecdote about recruitment as to how to find the places that you might want to work in or explore. Our most recent team member is a person, her name is Vinita. I hope she's not on the call, but she might be, but she won't mind the story. But anyway, we met her at a PCA and RC protest. One of my team members, was there, and they started talking about what you do. And turns out that she had actually photographed my father and me at a Fridays for Future protest 6-8 months ago, holding up some placards for her blog. And and now she's with Sea Balance. So I think that these organizations that you perhaps are seeking to work with also have their antennas up. Like I have antennas up wherever I'm in a train, or anybody who's doing something meaningful, thoughtful, is always somebody we are on the lookout for, in a way. So recognizing that you are as needed in that world as you might want to be in that world. The need is there on both sides, and just making yourself visible is important as well. So in short, go protest a lot. You'll find something. Yeah.
I think we have a question from a very young participant, if I'm not sure. If I'm a student in 12th and I want to pursue an alternative career related to helping our environment, what do you think is better, doing a graduation like a proper environmental sciences course, and then specializing, or possibly do internships and get a work experience and then decide? Manvinder, having dropped out of college, maybe you're the best person to answer this.
Yeah. I love this question. I've been through it. I think if you really want to work in the academics and research, and you're someone who loves working with structure, where you have very clear goals and like things are very lined up for you, it's really good to go academic way, because it helps you challenge your energy much more efficiently. Because if you take up the internship route, that's much more chaotic. There's nobody to like monitor you or like give you, sometimes can feel a little lost, and I've seen a lot of people losing out the energy. So like for me, I picked up, I just volunteered for a long time, and then I applied for a job at Greenpeace International. And I think I was a little too young and too inexperienced for them, and they said no. And I asked them, okay, at least give me an internship, and I begged them. Well, they gave me an internship. 4 months later, I worked hard. I had a job with them as a core campaigner. So it's, and that, and that's the time where I didn't have a degree, or I didn't have much of a background in the alternative sector. But it's much more open. Like you can't make mistake. Like whatever path you choose is the right path. You can take the college route. I know no such good academics or doing brilliant job. You can just be internship, or you can be just someone who loves walking around India, talking to people and talking to them about climate change. There is, like, every path is right. There's no mistake.
Thank you, Man. I think Nandita had a question about, for someone who is extremely new to the field, how can I know more about field organizations? I think we sort of discussed that question. Like, I think a little bit of online research, a little bit of meeting people who are doing good work, just connecting with them. Um, I think that's the best way, Nandita.
Siddharth, I've also put a link. I got to know there's a Ashoka fellow. Her name is, it's called fellow, but maybe it should be changed. It's Amanda Kazel has started this thing called Good Market Global. It's a place for people to also find meaningful work, in the alternative world in a way. I don't know how well stocked with opportunities, etc. it is. I just got to know about it 2 days ago. So if somebody wants to look at that, they can perhaps. Yeah.
I think Bhoomi is also will soon be starting a website called Share Eco Wisdom. So as part of that, opportunities in the alternative will also be there. So that's something to look out for. I think Kida.in is also in the process of coming up. There is something called Indian
also planning.
Multiversity. Right. Go ahead, man.
Yeah, we're also planning to have this as one of the milestones is for people who are new to the sector, alternative sector. Where do they start, and how do they connect to the mentors, and how do they reach out to people? I think it'll take another few months before we get kicked in, but feel free to drop us a mail on our website, and we'll let you know when we kick in.
Okay. So I think we are running short on time. So maybe it's time for closing comments from each of the panelists. Abhishek, would you like to start?
Sure. I mean, my closing comments would be one that a lot of what we call meaning is so constructed. It's how we structure our experience and how do we make sense of it. And a lot of that journey is individual. So when you talk about meaningful careers, I think one big part is really you making your own meaning and being able to draw joy, draw meaning from what you do. I think that is one. The other, I would say that this is tough. I mean, resisting the mainstream, exploring the alternatives is tough. So having a sangha, having a tribe really helps. And just knowing that what you're on to as a pursuit is a difficult pursuit, but a worthwhile pursuit. I think that's kind of second. And last, one thing I wanted to share regarding parents and so on was just that once you have inner clarity, and as inner clarity evolves, I've seen that the world outside also readjusts itself, and things start getting more favorable. Parents start getting more agreeable also. So I think inner clarity has a ripple effect into outer clarity. So these are things I wanted to share. And thanks for having me over. It was nice to be here.
Thank you, Abhishek, for joining in. Next, Manvinder, would you like to go next? Anyone? Vivek, Sita, Paras? We have like 6-7 minutes.
Yeah. So for me, I think it's a lot of time we get stuck at, what if I make a wrong choice? And that can like lead to like, trying to even get into alternative sector. It can lead to uh, information paralysis where, it's just like so many things that you're trying to get it right. Don't worry, just start doing it. Like people just join in. You find people coming from all walk of life and just like random people offering you different work or different ideas, and that takes you into a journey. So don't worry about things. Just keep walking the path that you feel like doing. And yeah, it's things work out. That's it.
Thank you, man. Vivek?
I was going to say that I don't have any closing remarks because I put it all out there already. I was supposed to save one for the end, but I don't know. I would just say that I think good work is its own salary. We often use this phrase in C-Balance and related networks that we pay ourselves this work. The people are like, what do you mean by you pay yourself this work? The work, the opportunity to do that work, which you have decided to do, is its own salary. And everything else is a bonus. The money, all of this, for sure, I speak from privilege. I'm not saying that this can be the viewpoint of anybody who has, is struggling. And to some degree, yes, personally, we're struggling. But I think if you see good work as its own reward, everything else being a bonus, then I think that's useful. And secondly, looking at needs. I think the moment you are able to live on a small income, if you can recognize what is essential for you, for your family, and recognize where your privilege or certain habits that have formed are locking you into a high earning sort of trajectory, trying to distill that into the nugget, that liberates you a lot. Actually, you can say yes to a lot more things once you're not on an EMI treadmill. So yeah, just one thing I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Vivek. Sita, you.
Yeah. One thing I want to say again is about the extent to which our subconscious has been programmed by the kind of life we are leading. Our parents, the way their minds have been programmed, the way schools are putting things into our heads, and so on. I think to re-examine that is a lifelong process. You never finish with re-examining meanings that have been put into you, like what Abhishek was saying. And I think that we are learning in one way in school and college. It's a lot of linear stuff. It's a lot of content put into our heads and so on. And if you ask me, there is another whole way of learning which has been more in spiritual systems. It's like learning from sutras. Now, learning from sutras is there is a thought, but you have to keep on mulling over it and filling it up with your life experiences, getting something out of it to make sense. Like for instance, if you're looking at careers or if you're looking at life, and we really, all of us need, whether it's for looking at carbon emissions or our own lives or whatever, what is essential and what is non-essential and what could be somewhere in between. Now, then I'm not asking others this question. I could ask if I want to, no harm. But at the same time, can I look at it for myself? What is really essential for my well-being or my life and so on? And not only career, but even things I buy or whatever. Now, this kind of process thinking, as we call it, is so little. So little we get enough of it. Some of us sort of stumble onto it on our own, and we find a way of looking at processes. And but unfortunately, many of us also don't, because the power of the system is so heavy that this is the meaning of success. Now, how do I question that? And there are layers upon layers of that. I've heard many people, even from sustainability, wanting to finally, okay, how do you scale it up? How do you grow big? My question is, why should everybody scale up everything? Scaling up is not everything. It comes from the other paradigm of big is beautiful or big is great. So like that, so many different things have to be questioned. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being big, but there is a problem with the race towards being big, everybody being there. So this questioning through some theme, now I'm just talking about one theme of, can I look at what is essential and what is not, or what is ecological living, or, and so on and so forth. And chewing on it for oneself, making it a mantra for oneself to keep looking at multiple things in life. I think that is very important to sort of decolonize our minds from, the standard kind of thinking.
Thank you, Sita. Paras, are you in? You have about 20 seconds to, you literally can only get. Hello, Paras. I think maybe Paras logged out.
For a meaningful career, I guess what comes to my mind is, somewhere in my college, my professor told me that, Paras, if your idea would be good, people will definitely be attracted towards it. So I, I live up to that thought, because when this farm to family work I started, just 10 days after that, this whole essential commodity act was just gone away with, and now we have this farm to families kind of reality for the whole of the country. So I think it's about, if you're really thinking about a problem and you are trying to solve it somewhere, if your ideas match, so you are already on a path of a meaningful career, and it will bring a lot of satisfaction to you.
Thank you, Paras. Thank you to all the panelists for joining in. It's been a wonderful discussion
Thank you for
on
having
work.
us.
I don't see many discussions on these kind of topics happening. So just thank all of you for joining in. Thank you for all the participants who have joined in. Just a couple of housekeeping instructions. If any of you are interested in figuring out sort of deeper engagements with Bhoomi, you guys, we have a 10-month fellowship that we offer in sustainability and one in holistic education. So you can find more information on that on our website, bhoomicollege.org. We are also starting our first online module that starts on July 4th. It's called Connecting to Self, Land and Community. So that's something which could be interesting to some of you who are really looking to probably make a shift to the alternative, or really want to do a little bit of introspection, self-level work. So if you are interested in that, just either you can direct message me, or just check out our website, bhoomicollege.org, or write to us at bhoomicollege@gmail.com. I'll drop in those info in the mail. So just thank you very much. This has been a wonderful Bhoomi Webinar Series. It's been the 10th one. If you want to check out the previous ones or this one, you can check out our YouTube channel. So that's it from me. Thank you, Sita. Thank you, Vivek. Thank you, Abhishek, Manvinder, Paras, and all of you. If you would like to connect to any one of the panelists, just write to us. We'd be happy to connect you to them. And if you want to get in touch with them and talk to them about their work, know more about their work in detail, happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Adil.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Ta-da.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.